Vesper Kane unclipped the pin from Sorrel Kane's lapel in front of everyone. Not somewhere quiet, not in the side hallway near the coat check where the catering staff moved back and forth and no one important would notice. Not at the edge of the room where the gesture could be misread as friendly, as casual, as two women adjusting each other's accessories, the way women sometimes do without meaning anything by it. She did it in the center of the Ardennes House Spring Preview Gallery, beneath rows of track lights aimed at silk panels and glass display cases, while art collectors, senior editors, foreign buyers, board members, photographers, and champagne-holding guests watched a private thing become a public wound. Sorrel Kane, 34-year-old wife of Ren Ashmore and the quietly controlling owner of the $1.8 billion fashion house his family had been referencing at dinner parties for months, stood beneath those lights with her hands still at her sides. She wore a deep charcoal dress, no statement jewelry, no sash or crest or anything that announced what she was, only a small silver brooch pinned near her left collarbone. To most people in the room, it looked old. To a few people at Ardennes House, it was the founder's pin, the first piece Isolde Kane had ever made with her own hands, before the company had a name, before it had a building, before it had anything at all except one woman's refusal to stop. Ren Ashmore, 37-year-old husband of Sorrel, and the smooth-faced executive working hard to attach his family's name to Ardennes' reputation, stood a few feet away with Vesper already beside him. Vesper Kane, 29-year-old brand strategist, and the woman Ren had stopped hiding, reached towards the pin with the confidence of someone who believed the room had already sided with her. Her fingers closed around it. Sorrel's voice stayed low. "Don't." Vesper tilted her head. "It's bringing the whole look down. You're at an Ardennes preview, and you're wearing something that looks like it came out of a junk drawer." "That pin has been in my family for 60 years, Sorrel said. "Don't touch it." Vesper smiled wider. "Then maybe leave it at home next time." She lifted the pin. The clasp released. It had been gently worked loose by a hand Sorrel would identify later, and the brooch came free. Vesper held it up between two fingers like evidence of poor taste. Then she set it down on the nearest display surface too quickly, too carelessly, and it slipped off the edge and struck the polished concrete floor. The sound was almost nothing, a small click, but Sorrel heard it in her chest. She knelt on the gallery floor and picked up the pin herself while cameras adjusted and Ren looked at the room instead of at his wife. And Vesper turned back toward the champagne table as if the matter had already resolved itself. Ottiline Ashmore, 62-year-old mother of Ren, and the woman who hosted a dinner party every time someone in her social circle had something worth celebrating or something worth pitching, watched from across the room with a thin smile. Next to her stood Decker Frayne, 45, Ren's business partner, and the man who had spent the past several months telling investors that the Ashmore family had a developing relationship with Ardennes House's leadership. No one in that gallery knew the truth. They didn't know Sorrel held controlling ownership of Ardennes House through the Kane Creative Trust, a private legal structure her mother had established during her illness to protect the company from outside pressure and public speculation. They didn't know Hawthorne Merle, 61, Ardennes' public-facing chairman, had been acting as Sorrel's proxy at every board meeting for 9 years while the trust held the actual authority. They didn't know the pin now lying in Sorrel's palm was catalogued as a protected founding artifact, and they didn't know that Hawthorne, from across the gallery, had already signaled the venue's security lead to preserve every camera angle from the past 40 minutes. Sorrel didn't yell. She didn't cry. She didn't look at Ren with the particular expression that asks why, because she already knew the answer and she wasn't ready to say it out loud in a room full of people holding champagne. She stood up, closed her fingers around the pin, and looked at the people who had just mistaken her silence for surrender. "You have no idea what you just handled," she said quietly. Vesper glanced back with a half-smile. "It's a brooch." Sorrel's eyes moved to Ren. "No," she said. "It's the last thing my mother fastened to me before she died." She walked out. 6 weeks earlier, Sorrel had arrived at Ardennes' atelier before sunrise. The building sat on a narrow street in the garment district, its exterior plain enough that people walked past it every day without slowing down. The facade had been that way since her grandmother Isolde opened it. Isolde Kane had believed that things worth entering didn't need to advertise themselves from the outside. Sorrel wore a grey coat and low boots, and the founder's pin against her lapel. She carried her own key. The overnight security team straightened when she passed. No one bowed. She hated theatre, but the room adjusted around her the way rooms do when the person who actually holds everything walks in. She found Izora, 23, a junior pattern cutter in her second year of training, sitting alone at a drafting table near the arched door. The girl's shoulders were tight. A folded piece of paper sat under her sketchpad. Sorrel saw the letterhead before Izora tried to cover it, a hospital billing department. Izora's mother had been waiting on a procedure for 6 weeks. Sorrel did not look at the draft in front of her first. She looked at Izora's hands. "You haven't slept," she said. Izora looked down. "I'm fine." "No, you're not," Sorrel said gently, "and that's allowed." She pulled the billing letter out from under the sketchpad, read it, and took a pen from the tray beside the lamp. She signed the bottom line as the Trust's authorized representative. Izora's face went still. "The Relief Fund clears requests like this by Thursday," Sorrel said. "Accounting knows my signature. It won't go to committee." Izora's mouth opened and nothing came out. Hawthorne Merle appeared in the doorway of the archive room. He had been at Ardennes since before Sorrel could walk, had protected the Trust through her mother's illness and through Sorrel's own grief, and had never once let anyone mistake Sorrel's absence from the front row for absence of power. "You handled that the way your mother would have," he said quietly. Sorrel touched the pin at her collarbone. Her mother, Clem Kane, had been gone for 9 years. She had founded the Trust 3 months before her diagnosis was confirmed, when she still had time to be careful. The structure had been designed not to hide Sorrel, but to protect Ardennes from the kind of chaos that follows sudden public transfers of control. Clem had given Sorrel the founder's pin on a Tuesday evening in the company archive, sitting beneath a framed photograph of Isolde. Clem's hands were thin by then, but still steady as she fastened the clasp. "The world will assume you are small," she had said. "Until the moment you choose otherwise. Pick that moment yourself." That was why Sorrel had never told Wren the full picture, not to deceive him, because in the beginning, before the investor dinners, before the brand strategy sessions, before Decker Frayne and his folders, Wren had loved her as a woman, not as a doorway. And after her mother died, when the lawyers advised keeping the trust structure quiet for at least 5 years, she had told herself that privacy was protection, for the company, for the marriage, for the version of Wren she had believed in. Back in the atelier, Hawthorne set a thin folder on the table between them. "The annual collection launch is moving forward, full press. The spring line is getting more international attention than anything we've shown in 12 years. He paused. "The board is asking again whether you want to be introduced publicly." Sorrel looked through the glass wall at the floor below, where the day shift would start arriving in an hour. She could see half-finished garments on mannequins, bolts of silk rolled neatly against the wall, and the corner of the archive where her grandmother's original sketches lived in temperature-controlled cases. "Not yet," she said. Hawthorne did not push. He never did. "The Ashmore family is using our name with at least 3 investor groups," he said carefully. "Decker Frayne has materials with our branding on them. The language suggests a formal commercial relationship." Sorrel looked at the window. "Wren doesn't know what he's doing." Hawthorne was quiet for a moment, not to disagree, just to let her hear her own words. At the brand styling session Ottiline had arranged for the preview gala, Sorrel arrived 7 minutes early and was told she was late. The room was full of mirrors and floral arrangements, and Decker Frayne standing near a table covered in materials that bore Ardennes' letterhead. Sorrel saw the documents from across the room. She recognized the typeface, the crest, the placement of the logo. She also recognized what was wrong. The authorization sequence in the lower right corner was from an old internal style guide, not from the current trust approval workflow. Someone had taken an old event packet and dressed it to look like a formal partnership agreement. She took a quiet photograph on her phone. Across the room, Vesper was watching her. "Something interesting?" Vesper asked. Sorrel looked at her evenly. "Old habit," she said. That night she sent the photograph to Hawthorne. His reply came in 4 minutes. "I see it. Don't confront tonight. Let us document the source." The pin was already loose when Sorrel dressed for the gala. She found it that way when she went to fasten it. The clasp, slightly bent, not broken, just weakened. She held it in her palm for a long moment, thinking it had been in its case that morning. She had fastened it herself at the atelier. Between then and now, it had been in her coat pocket while she was downstairs speaking with a buyer. And Wren had asked to borrow her coat for 20 minutes while his was being pressed. She photographed the clasp from 3 angles and sent them to Pema Yole, 52, Ardennes' head archivist, who called within 2 minutes. "The hinge has been pressed inward," Pema said. "Not from wear, from deliberate compression. If someone applies even light pressure to the pin, the clasp will give." Sorrel looked at the pin. "This is evidence now," Pema said. I know. She wore it anyway, because it was her mother's, because her grandmother had made it with her own hands in a rented workroom before the company existed, because if she stopped wearing her own inheritance out of fear, then they had already taken the one thing she had never agreed to give. She sent the photographs to Hawthorne with a timestamp. He confirmed they were logged. When Vesper unclipped the pin at the gallery, Sorrel had already known it was coming. That made it worse, not better. Knowing in advance doesn't protect you from the moment, it only keeps you from falling. She knelt on the gallery floor and picked up the pin herself. Later, standing in the Ardennes archive with rain coming down hard against the windows and the security lights still on from the entry trigger, she finally let herself feel it. Pema was the first to reach her. She set a velvet tray on the table beneath the examination lamp without saying anything. Sorrel opened her hand. The pin slid out onto the velvet. Pema's eyes filled. "Your grandmother wore this for the press photograph on opening day," she said softly. She told a junior seamstress she put it on so she'd have something steady when the cameras made her nervous. Sorrel bent forward over the table and pressed her hands flat against the surface. Her shoulders shook once, then twice, and then she let it out. Not loudly, not theatrically, but fully, the way grief comes when it has been kept polite for too long. She was not crying only for the pin. She was crying for every dinner where Ottiline had described Ardennes House as though it was a resource the Ashmore family was generously allowing to exist. For every time Wren had looked past her in a room full of people he was trying to impress. For every moment she had told herself that his ambition was separate from his heart, and that loving him did not require her to be small. Hawthorne stood near the archive door. He gave her the dignity of distance. When Stellan Ord arrived, Stellan Ord, 54, Sorrel's private attorney and the legal trustee of her personal estate, who had driven across town in the rain without being asked twice. He set his briefcase on the table and looked at the pin under the lamp. "Do you want to know how far it goes?" he asked. Sorrel lifted her head. Her face was red. Her eyes were steady. "I already know how far it goes," she said. "I want to know what we can prove." Stellan opened the briefcase. He laid 4 folders on the table. The first contained divorce preparation documents. The second was a civil claim for the deliberate damage of a catalogued founding artifact. The third was a corporate fraud inquiry into the unauthorized use of Ardennes' name and branding in investor materials. The fourth Stellan placed under his hand before she could see it. Sorrel looked at him. "Decker Frayne has already sent those materials to 6 investor contacts," Stellan said. 2 of them forwarded copies to Ardennes' legal department asking for confirmation of the Ashmore partnership. They gave written consent for our team to review. "There's more," he said. She knew from his tone that it would land harder than the rest. He opened the 4th folder, 3 pages. An anonymous business guarantee from 3 years ago, from when Wren's consulting firm had nearly collapsed. A private medical payment from 18 months ago, when Ottiline's procedure required a sum her insurance declined. A quiet settlement from 14 months ago, when Decker's involvement in a client dispute had nearly gone public. All 3 had been paid through protected trust accounts. All 3 had come ultimately from Sorrel. None of them had known, or they had never considered the question of who kept bailing the boat. "I didn't do those things to hold leverage over them," Sorrel said. "No," Stellan said quietly. "You did them because you thought love meant showing up without keeping score. And they learned to live under that, without looking up to see whose hands were holding the ceiling." The words were harder than anger would have been. Sorrel stepped back from the table. When she looked up, something had settled in her face. Not cruelty, not satisfaction, just the particular clarity that arrives when a person stops pretending they haven't already decided. "Preserve everything," she said, "and don't move on any of it yet. Let them think I went home to cry." Hawthorne's mouth tightened. "And did you?" She looked at the pin. "Yes," she said, "and I'm done now." Cruweld, 44, Ardennes' head of archival security, appeared from the monitoring room with a tablet in his hand. He had footage from 12 camera angles from the gallery. He had already found the one that mattered. It showed Wren 20 minutes before the gala, alone in the bedroom where Sorrel's coat was hanging, his hand going into the coat pocket, a pause, his hand coming out. Sorrel watched the clip twice, then she said, "Log it." She did not serve the divorce papers the next day, or the week after. She let Wren believe she was processing. She answered his messages with short, neutral replies. She stayed in a private apartment the trust maintained for the company's visiting designers, quiet, high up, with no photographs on the walls. Wren told mutual friends she was being sensitive, Decker told investors the Ashmore partnership with Ardennes was still on track. Ottoline described the pin incident over lunch as Sorrel being unable to handle public life. Vesper posted photographs of herself at Ardennes-adjacent events. Never inside the house, never with formal credentials, but close enough that the implication floated in the air like something she had already been promised. Sorrel reviewed the fraud documents with Stellan every morning. One evening, Ruel Dane, 41, the senior production coordinator who had arranged the preview gala venue, appeared at the archive entrance. She had been the anonymous number who had messaged Sorrel 3 weeks before the gala, a one-line warning. Something in the brand documents looks borrowed. Be careful tonight. She stood at the archive door like she expected to be turned away. I should have used my name, Ruel said. I'm sorry. Sorrel shook her head. You warned me, that mattered. Ruel sat down and told Stellan everything clearly. How Decker had brought the investor materials to the venue. How he had told the on-site staff not to contact Ardennes directly because the arrangement was sensitive. How she had noticed the authorization code looked copied from something older and checked it against an archived event packet she still had in her own files. That's why I messaged you, Ruel said. I saw how Vesper was watching the pin all evening. I didn't know exactly what they were planning, but I knew it was already in motion. Stellan turned off the recording after Ruel nodded her approval. Your statement is the bridge, he said. Thank you. Ruel looked at Sorrel. Will they face consequences? Sorrel looked at the evidence case where the pin rested under soft white light. Yes, she said, but not because I want to punish anyone. Then, why? Because if people can walk into rooms wearing a company's name like a borrowed coat, Sorrel said, the company has to walk back in wearing its own. The annual Ardennes collection launch was held in the house's main presentation space, a long room with white walls and warm lighting where the most important shows had always happened. Collectors who had attended for 30 years knew that when Ardennes showed in this room, something real was happening. Wren, Vesper, Ottoline and Decker were seated in the 4th row. Their invitations had been sent through proper channels and listed clearly as industry observer seating. Decker had photographed his invitation and sent it to 3 investors before the event with a message that read simply, front row adjacent. Sorrel had been told she had let it stand. The collection presented beautifully. The room held itself with the particular stillness that only arrives when work is genuinely good. When the last look came down, Hawthorne walked to the small podium at the front of the room. Before we close, he said, Ardennes House will make a brief institutional statement. Wren leaned slightly toward Vesper. Ottoline straightened her back. This statement will be made, Hawthorne continued, by Ardennes' controlling owner. Wren smiled faintly. He expected someone he didn't know. A name from a board document, a formal figure from the trust's legal structure, someone distant enough that Decker's materials could still breathe. Then Sorrel walked out. She wore charcoal. The founder's pin was at her collarbone, restored, secure, resting in its proper place. The front rows rose before Hawthorne finished the introduction. Collections editors who had attended for decades understood what the pin meant. Junior staff who had never seen it before rose as the people beside them did. The room stood. Vesper's champagne glass hovered in her hand. Ottoline's expression went blank. Wren sat very still, and the stillness was different from composure. Hawthorne spoke clearly. Sorrel Emmeline Kane, controlling owner of Ardennes House and sole trustee of the Kane Creative Trust. The name settled into the room like something long overdue. Sorrel touched the pin once, briefly, the way she always did when she needed to remember who had made it. This pin, she said, was the first thing my grandmother made before this house existed. She wore it to the first press event, to the first creditor meeting, to the last working day she ever spent in this building before she handed it to my mother. My mother wore it to the board meeting where she voted to protect this company from an acquisition that would have erased her name from it. She gave it to me with the understanding that it was not jewelry. She paused. It was proof of a decision. The screen behind her showed Isolde's original design sketch, then a photograph of Clem wearing the pin at a shareholder meeting, then the pin as it currently sat, restored, against Sorrel's lapel. Recently, she said, this pin was intentionally damaged at a company event by someone who believed it had no value. The recording of that event, along with documentation of several related actions, has been turned over to our legal team. Stellan stepped forward with a sealed folder. His voice was even and unhurried. Ardennes House has not authorized any commercial partnership, brand ambassadorship, investment advisory role, or co-branding arrangement involving the Ashmore family or Decker Frayne Associates. All materials suggesting otherwise have been referred for fraud review. Any investment discussions conducted on the implied basis of Ashmore access to Ardennes are terminated as of today. The room didn't gasp. It went quiet in the specific way that means everyone is recalibrating at the same time. Decker's phone lit up. He looked at the screen and set it face down. Ottiline pressed her lips together. Wren stood. Crew was at the aisle before he reached it, not to remove him, but to hold the moment on camera. Sorrel did not look at Wren first. She finished what she had come to say. Ardennes House is also announcing the founding of the Isolde Kane Fellowship, a full-year residency program for emerging textile designers from under-resourced backgrounds. It will be funded through a portion of this season's licensing revenue and the proceeds of tonight's collector reception. Hands went up before she finished the sentence, not paddles. Hands from every section of the room. Wren's voice came from the aisle, Sorrel. She turned. He looked at her the way people look when they finally see something they should have looked at years ago and cannot explain to themselves why they didn't. You should have told me who you were, he said. The words settled in the air between them. I did, she said, every day. You weren't listening for that kind of thing. Stellan appeared at the far end of the aisle beside a process server holding a sealed envelope. Wren looked at it. He didn't move for a moment. Wren Ashmore, the process server said. He placed the envelope into Wren's hand. Wren stared at the envelope. Then he looked at Sorrel. We can fix this. Think about what we could build together. You and me, Ardennes and Ashmore. Sorrel looked at him for a long time. There he was, even now, reaching for the company before reaching for her hand. The Ashmores and Ardennes have never built anything together, she said quietly. The Ashmores borrowed a name that wasn't theirs, and I paid the interest every time it caused damage. I'm done paying. She walked away. Behind her, the Isolde Kane Fellowship received its first donation before the lights in the presentation room went down, from a collector who had been watching Ardennes for 40 years, and had been waiting, she said, for the right moment to invest in something that had always been real. Sorrel returned to the archive before sunrise. She stood in front of her grandmother's portrait for a long time. Pema placed the founder's pin in a new display case beneath the photograph, not locked away, not under velvet, but visible, labeled and lit. Izora appeared in the doorway. She held a small card in both hands, uncertain whether to knock on the open door. My mother came through surgery this morning, she said. I just wanted to tell you. I didn't know how else to. She stopped. Her eyes were full. Sorrel crossed the room and put a hand briefly on Izora's shoulder. Go be with her, she said. Hawthorne came to stand beside Sorrel after Izora left. They looked at the pin together under its light. Are you ready to be public now? He asked. Sorrel thought about it. Not the answer. She already knew the answer. She was thinking about what it meant to be ready, about the difference between readiness and necessity, and how for a long time she had confused the two. Yes, she said, not because they broke me open, because I'm finished keeping myself closed. In the weeks that followed, the Kane Creative Trust made its first public disclosure. The fraud review found sufficient grounds for civil action. Decker Frayne's investor materials were pulled from circulation pending litigation. Wren filed a response to the divorce petition and withdrew it 6 days later. Vesper's brand contracts evaporated quietly, one by one, and then there were none. Ottiline's social calendar narrowed in the particular way it does when the rooms that mattered decide to stop extending invitations. Decker stopped returning calls from everyone who had once been eager to return his. The fall was not loud all at once. It was slower than that and quieter, and in some ways worse, door by door, name by name, call by unanswered call. And in the Ardennes archive, beneath the portrait of Isolde Kane, the founder's pin sat in its display case with a small card beside it. The card read, made before there was anything, worn when it mattered most, given to the one who would stay. Some things look their smallest right before the room finally understands what they are worth.